to advance, to be used to say to other racial minorities, hey, the Asians made it, why can't you? Why can't you be more like the Asians? That's not the role that I'm looking for myself. It's not the role that I would wish for any of you. My hope is instead that in this community, that we will make good on principles. All of us, refugees, adoptees, people of mixed backgrounds, Californians, families that have been here for 6 generations. We, or our ancestors, came here seeking freedom and opportunity because America beckoned as that city upon a hill. Strangers from a different shore, we were drawn here because there was something here that our ancestors couldn't find where they were coming from. And that's something I would suggest to you is best served by our working together with others, not attacking them. Thank you so much. We have cards that have been circulated. Has someone collected the cards?
So folks can just pass them to the aisle. Trustee and I can collect them.
You've been a great audience.
You should change the note. Here, Joanne.
So I hope some of you are thinking of coming to law school. Okay. Great. So, class-based affirmative action. So, it's interesting. Class-based affirmative action is sometimes offered as an alternative. They're not mutually exclusive. There's a book written in 1996 by a fellow named Richard Kahlenberg, I think of him as a friend, called The Remedy. It's the major study of class-based affirmative action. The renowned sociologist William Julius Wilson reviewed this book, okay? And he made 2 points about this book, and he did it so much better than I could. I'll just tell you what William Julius Wilson said. He said, class-based affirmative action suffers from 2 problems. The first is, it is true African Americans and Hispanics are disproportionately poor, but most of us, myself included, we're just bad with statistics, and we make an error. We think if you have class-based affirmative action, you'll have lots of African Americans and Hispanics who benefit. You won't. No matter how you define class, it's a virtual certainty that you'll have mostly white people in the program. Now that's not bad. That's not bad. It will address problems of class, but it won't address problems of race. Why do we have mainly white people? Because African Americans and Hispanics are still a minority. And there are many, many, many more poor white people. So the program would be primarily, not exclusively, but primarily poor white people. Now, again, maybe that's what we want, but that doesn't address issues of race. The second problem is, and this is regrettable, okay, and I want to be clear, I'm not stereotyping, there are causes for this, but Dr. Wilson points out, when you have class-based programs, you tend to admit into them people who are so severely underprepared, they're just going to confirm stereotypes, that they're not going to succeed. It is actually true that no matter how you create these programs, okay, race-based or other types of programs, you typically get the people who are the most advantaged of the least advantaged. That's just in the nature of the design of government programs. The same thing is true when you do programs for the disabled or whoever. You do get disabled people, you just tend to get the least disabled of the disabled. That's not bad. But what happens if you do a program that's just class is you've eliminated from the program because they're not poor enough those African Americans and Hispanics most likely to be able to succeed. So you've created a perverse situation with class-based programs where you're going to end up, if you don't also look at race and background, you're just going to end up with lots and lots and lots of poor whites. Again, not bad, but doesn't address racial representation, and you'll have lots of people who really have low chances. Newest Supreme Court Justice Kavanaugh, he likes beer. That was actually the question. I'm just quoting the justice himself, with all due respect. Role of international students. This is a great question. So what's interesting, if you go back and you look early on, international students got mixed in for purposes of inflating the numbers. What we're talking about now are U.S. citizens, okay? Not international students. But there's something fascinating about this, right? Which is, how do international students fit into all of this? Are they being used to present diversity in a way that doesn't help native-born minorities? And this isn't just about Asian Americans versus African Americans. Fascinating issue arose at Cornell last year. Cornell actually had a student movement to change the definition of African American to ensure that foreign-born blacks and the children of foreign-born blacks weren't included. So the question, it's a great question. It's too complicated for more than just the simple answer that yes, the role of international students, both Asian and non-Asian, just complicates all of this. You probably realize international students are used in some ways to fill the coffers by paying full freight tuition, not qualifying financially, and so on. How are Asian Americans viewed in law? There's a great study. Justice Goodwin Liu of the California Supreme Court, you can look this up. He did a fantastic statistical study that showed a lot of things about Asian Americans. I'll just name 3 of the findings. And then I'll talk about how Asian Americans are viewed doctrinally in law. But he did a study of Asian Americans in the legal profession. He found, first, the Asian American representation has rocketed upward. So when I went to law school at the University of Michigan, which I grew up down the street from, so I graduated in 1991. Yeah, it's hard to believe. I'm 51, but I'm Asian, so you can't tell. In the class of 1991 at University of Michigan Law School, commonly considered in the top 10, there were 400 graduates, approximately. There were 6 Asian Americans. We made up 1.5% of the class. I knew all the other Asian Americans. Now, more than an order of magnitude increase, tenfold, within my lifetime. So that's the first thing. Second thing is, Asian Americans, despite their overrepresentation at entry level, have great difficulty moving up. You look at partners at major law firms, very few Asian Americans, and in other leadership roles. And finally, what the data shows is that Asian Americans are coming to law school now in lower numbers. So there was a dip in the number of law students with the Great Recession. But Asian Americans dropped precipitously relative to others. So Asian Americans now have turned away from law, which is why part I hope some of you will come to law school, because these issues are live right now. I'll give you an example. Just before this program, a friend of mine, a colleague, wrote to me, someone of Chinese descent. He is, I think, 3rd or 4th generation in the U.S. He's descended from a paper son. You may know about this. So during the exclusion era, lots and lots of Chinese who cheated. They said, my name is X, when it wasn't. They were a cousin or just from the same village, and they came in, and because of the San Francisco earthquake in 1906, the destruction of lots of records, they were able to say, I'm grandfathered in, even though the Chinese are being excluded, you have to permit me to come in, I'm the descendant of so-and-so, and I can come in. So this friend of mine, 4th generation California, wrote to me and he said, you know, if they get rid of birthright citizenship, does that mean I'm no longer a U.S. citizen? And I wrote back to him, I said, yeah, this is going to affect a lot of people if there's an effort to make it retroactive. So how have Asian Americans been viewed in the law as neither black nor white? I'll just list a few of the examples. So Wong Kim Arthur's case that I talked about. The Solicitor General, that's the U.S. government official who represents the United States, the people in the Supreme Court, he wrote a brief. It's filled with citations to venerable international law sources. And then he says that the admission of Chinese to citizenship would make citizenship not worth having, because it would be degraded. So the Chinese, the Japanese, the Koreans, eventually all of Asia was part of an Asiatic barred zone. So historically, we've been excluded. Then we were not allowed to naturalize. The Supreme Court considered a case in 1922, another in 1923. In Ozawa, it said that people who were Japanese couldn't naturalize because they weren't free white persons. The fellow Ozawa, just such a touching argument. He wrote his own briefs. He wasn't a lawyer, but he explained how he spoke English only, how he was Christian, how he was assimilated, how he didn't marry a picture bride, how he sent his kids to schools to learn English, how they didn't speak any Japanese at home. In other words, he presented himself as being as assimilated as possible. He was not a free white person. He was turned down. The next year, a South Asian applicant by the name of Pin applied and actually argued that he was scientifically Caucasian. He too was turned down. In that same time period, the Supreme Court decided Coughlin versus Rice. That was a school segregation case out of Mississippi involving Asian Americans. The opinion is so cursory, it really is nothing to the opinion. It just says if segregation is legitimate as between whites and blacks, we don't see any problem as to pupils of the yellow race. So there's been a tremendous amount of law made by Asian Americans, usually against them, but Asian Americans have not been passive and submissive, bowing like Charlie Chan. Asian Americans are part of American legal history. The internment, tremendously important. These cases, some of my colleagues, not that long ago, would have thought of these as obscure, only suited to academic study, but these cases are at the heart of contemporary debates over what it means to be an American. Asians have defined American citizenship historically. Group suing Harvard, who are they? So it's interesting, the folks suing Harvard are being backed by someone whose main accomplishment in life, he would be proud of it, so I'm characterizing him as he would want to be characterized, was dismantling the Voting Rights Act. Edward Blum, whose litigation strategy with the Voting Rights Act was to recognize that remedying discrimination was appropriate, but to ensure that there was no actual effective means to do so. So this case, people have been looking for this case for a long time. If you go back and look for 20 years, there's been discussion, more than 20 years, of Asian Americans as a means to attack affirmative action. And it actually, the only surprise here is that it took so long to file this type of case. Thurgood Marshall and the NAACP used Brown versus Board to strategically advance a personal agenda. Is this change through the agenda justified? Interesting. Thurgood Marshall and the NAACP, there's a great book by Richard Kluger called Simple Justice. They litigated for black equality to fight separate but equal. Fascinating thing about what they did, excuse me. They started off not challenging separate but equal. They started off by saying, okay, we'll accept separate but equal, but give us the equal. Because at the time, you could look at public schools and there were black schools or white schools. There's just no question. Black schools were physically inferior schools. They had secondhand textbooks. They had underpaid teachers, etc. So their initial strategy was to litigate for equality, and then they finally decided to make a full frontal attack on Jim Crow segregation. The U.S. Supreme Court almost came out the other way. If you study this history, there was a chance that the Supreme Court, which ruled unanimously under Chief Justice Earl Warren in 1954, that they might have come out approving racial segregation. What a different world this would we would be in.